Welcome back. I'm Austin Westfall. Hamas is not the only terrorist group using tunnels. The IDF announcing on Tuesday that it destroyed a Hezbollah-owned tunnel connecting Lebanon and Israel as its ground operation north of the border continued to target the group's infrastructure. That comes a handful of days after the IDF hit another 2-mile-long tunnel that crossed between Lebanon and Syria. The IDF says that one was used by Hezbollah to smuggle Iranian weapons. Retired Marine Intelligence Officer Hal Kempfer standing by to break it down. Hal, as always, why are these groups so into tunnels? Is it simply because they're hard to detect?
Well, Austin, yeah, that's basically it. They're very difficult to detect. And the methodology, the tactics, techniques, procedures, the engineering, if you will, these tunnels, there's a commonality that you will see. Interestingly, Hezbollah has definitely refined building tunnels quite a bit. They've had this battle going on for decades with Israel, and they've been building these reinforced tunnels, as you see here, with the concrete and all the support and everything else in order to move a lot of stuff. Even with the tunneling between, you'd say, why would you have to do tunneling between Syria and going into Lebanon? Part of that's to hide anything, certainly from the Lebanese army, but also to hide anything from overhead imagery. So they want to build these tunnels in such a way so they can use them as smuggling routes to move weapons, ammunition, people back and forth. And Hezbollah, and if you go back before Hezbollah, the PLO was using tunnels to get into Israel as well. Interestingly, the technology developed, or the capability to develop these tunnels, was big along the northern border with Lebanon and Hezbollah. A lot of the practices, best practices, if you will, in building those tunnels are things that were transferred over to the Hamas, and they kind of put that into effect. The tunnel network. Reportedly, the tunnel network that Hezbollah has in Lebanon, particularly southern Lebanon, but also around Beirut, is far greater than the totality of the tunnel network that Hamas has.
Wow.
in Gaza. And of course, they call that the Gaza Metro. Now, if I could point out this one tunnel, if I could,
Yeah.
That tunnel was kind of interesting. They had to discover the entrance of it by going into Lebanon because there was not an entrance for it into Israel. And this is something that goes back quite a ways. As you may have heard, one of the more contentious borders in the world is the one between North and South Korea along the demilitarized zone, or DMZ. And the North Koreans have been building tunnels to punch through into South Korea in surprising areas for, well, as long as there's been a North Korea up there since the end of the Korean War. They've been building a lot of very advanced tunnels. Some of the tunnels are reportedly big enough that they can actually put tanks and armored vehicles into these tunnels to give you an idea of how big it is. But one of the things they do is they don't build an exit or an entrance. They don't build a opening on the South Korean side. And in this case, Hezbollah did not build an opening on the Israeli side. And the reason is that it can't be discovered. In other words, you build 95% or 99% of the tunnel, but you leave that last bit still covered up so they can't discover the tunnel opening. And then when you plan to use the tunnel is when you bust out that opening on the other side, and then you rush your forces in through the tunnel. That's a tactical way of avoiding discovery before you actually use the tunnel, because if you do build an opening or an entrance or an exit, if you will, from the tunnel, and it is discovered, that gives your enemy, in this case for Hezbollah, their enemy would be Israel, that would give Israel a chance to booby trap the tunnel entrance in the hopes that whenever the Hezbollah forces come through, they could collapse the tunnel on top of them, which Hezbollah wants to try and avoid.
That video that we were showing was posted by the IDF on social media earlier. I got to ask you about the wider conflict in Lebanon. The IDF, they're sure not slowing down their campaign, are they? Aside from these tunnels being found and their ground incursion, we're still hearing of activity in Beirut, Hal, correct?
Oh, absolutely. They are going in, particularly that southern area of Beirut. I haven't seen a real good map, but I have seen maps in the past that kind of break out Lebanon and the Beirut area demographically as to where the predominant Shiite area is, Shiite Muslim neighborhoods are, and those are the neighborhoods where you're seeing Hezbollah facilities, whether it's a headquarters, intelligence center, logistics center, whatever it is. These are the places that they hide. These are the places where they conduct operations from. These are the places where they store weapons and do all sorts of other things. And these are the places that are being targeted by Israel. It's difficult. And of course, there is collateral damage since they're in major urban areas. One thing Israel has done as much, I would say in some ways more than what they did in Gaza, is this advanced notification process of telling people in these neighborhoods, going through there and looking at where their cell phones are, their hard lines or whatever, and telling people to get out, saying, look, you are near someplace that we're going to bomb within 12 hours or 24 hours or whatever, and doing this advanced notification. Frankly, in the history of war, I have never seen anything like what's being done now, providing notification to civilians to get out of someplace prior to being bombed. This, there's obviously everything Israel's doing is controversial, and there's been a lot of international condemnation of what Israel's doing. The sheer amount of firepower that it's been using. But the other side is the international law of war side. They have been providing notifications in these areas saying, get out.
Does that mean that the bad guys are getting out too, though?
Well, that's the problem is if you tell the civilians to get out, you're also kind of giving a hint to the bad guys, which is, I guess they know where we are and they know how to get out too. And that's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, you're making an extraordinary effort to save innocent lives. On the other hand, you're also basically signaling to your enemy that this is where you're going to hit, and that gives them time to do things. And it's something I'm sure they have to balance out. But I would say at this point of the war, with all the international pressure that's exerted on Israel, they're leaning towards the side of trying to minimize civilian casualties as much as possible. Although with that said, Yoav Gallant has said today, as he said, and I think Netanyahu has said it yesterday, was talking about, and I think Netanyahu probably said better, was that the Lebanese do not want to see Lebanon look like Gaza. And of course, President Biden basically reportedly told Netanyahu, no, you do not do what you in Lebanon, what you did in Gaza. But I will also say that there is a certain psychological dimension to war. And simply just mentioning that with all the images coming out of Gaza has a tremendous amount of deterrence value across the board, and certainly incentivizes Hezbollah and the Lebanese government to push for some sort of ceasefire with as much effort as they can.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. Does it feel like that's actually in the cards? Does it feel like that's something that's achievable in the near future?
Austin, I think you're absolutely right that it's achievable. I think, and the reason why, and this is what's interesting, with the split that we've seen with Hezbollah saying, "Hey, we're going to get a ceasefire agreement regardless of what happens in Gaza," this has really pulled the rug out from under Hamas. They're negotiating. Well, part of their negotiation, part of their strength in their negotiation, is that Hezbollah is standing beside them as an ally. And now Hezbollah has basically said, hey, Gaza, Hamas, you're on your own as far as your own negotiation goes. And with that, Hamas has to feel rather disempowered. So there's actual talk about Hamas maybe suddenly coming to the table to try and get some sort of ceasefire agreement in sooner rather than later, simply because they've lost a lot of impetus, if you will, a lot of power that they had in the negotiation process. And then the same's true when you say, hey, you don't want Lebanon to look like Gaza. I have to tell you, for everybody in Lebanon, that's got to scare the hell out of them. And it's got to put phenomenal pressure, not just on Hezbollah, but on the Lebanese government to pressure Hezbollah to come to some sort of agreement sooner rather than later.
We'll leave it there for now, Hal. Thanks.
Thank you, Austin.